Welcome back to our second half of our test review here. We've gone through the first 20 questions. Hopefully my explanations have been as good as you'd like or as good as you'd need. So we're going to now pass straight up to the second part of the test, which is your document part of the test. So we have 8 documents, 16 questions to go through. Okay, so my first order of business is look at the questions, figure out what they're asking, and then look for what they're asking for. It's nothing more difficult than that. So we look at what do these farmers of Illinois think of monopolies? What do these farmers think about railroads? It's resolved by the farmers of Illinois, so we know this is where what the farmers are saying. Not regulated or proved detrimental to the public. There it is, right there. That's what they think. The railways. So far we have monopolies. It mentions monopolies right here in the top half of the question. Monopolies have proved detrimental to the public. The railways have proved themselves to be, so we have railways opposed to free commerce between states. Commerce meaning trade. So our first question is, farmers think monopolies are detrimental to the public. Bad for everybody. The railways are opposed to free trade. They want to charge people as much money as they can, keep competition down. Okay, so hopefully that's good. Document number 2 here, we have 2A and 2B. So let's look at the questions again. What methods did railroads and monopolies use to gain valuable land, and how did people show their opposition to these? So how did these monopolies and railroads get their land, and how did people show their opposition? How did they show they were against it? So we look at here. Okay, after 1860, millions of acres were given. That's all. This all here is first sentence or so is fine and good, but really doesn't do us any good. Okay, it says the most valuable oil, lumber, metal lands were occupied under federal land acts obtained by fraud. There's one. In the struggle for these resources, legislatures were bribed, people were robbed, and all sorts of illegal methods were used. So we have several different things that you can throw in there. So what methods did they use? Railroads and monopolies bribed legislatures, obtained land by fraud, and used all sorts of illegal measures to get their land. Done. Period. End of story. There are 3 things right here that I've just highlighted that are the only things you really need to know for that answer. We look at number 2. How did people show their opposition? So we look at, that's the key word right there. We're going to look for opposition. And look, opposition. So now we know we're looking in the right spot. The opposition made itself felt in political channels. So we're going through some sort of government here. Railroad corporations had been opposed by both major parties since 1872. So we're looking at forming new parties. So in 1888, the platforms of the 4 new parties were such that opposition was brought against them. Federal legislation or laws were demanded, just so we know. So that's all part of it. So we go back to write out the answer, and the answer happens to be that of the platforms of the parties. So we have 4 new parties that were formed, and federal legislation was demanded in order to change this. And eventually it was. Now we look at question number 3 so far. Now we're up to document number 3. Again, this whole document business is not as difficult as you think it is. I know everybody looks at it and goes, oh my God, there's a lot of words I have to read. Not so tough. So what problems was this law intended to address? So we're looking for something that it was intended to change So we're looking for a change here in question 1. Question B, the government could punish trusts or corporations by breaking them down into small companies. What would the government have to prove in order to force this breakup? So in order to make these companies that were big to small, you had to prove something. So let's see, section 1. Every contract combination in the form of trust or otherwise conspiracy to trade is hereby declared illegal. So what was it? It was designed to break up trusts and get rid of monopolies. So this law was intended to address the problems of trusts and monopolies. Done. Not exactly as difficult as you think. In order to force the breakup of a company, they would have to prove something. Let's see, they would have to be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor. They'd have to be found guilty of some crime. If they tried to monopolize any part of trade or business, they would also have to be found guilty of that. Okay, so we have all of this here. So let's see. Again, the second half of this is the question. The government would have to prove that they were trying to monopolize trade or commerce, and they would have to be found guilty of some sort of crime in order to be broken up. If they couldn't prove that, they couldn't be broken up. Document number 4 comes from the Digest, Literary Digest of 1904. And we're asking the questions, what dangers do these papers see in secret campaign contributions from trusts? Trusts donating money to people who are trying to become elected to a political position. And how do they suggest in getting rid of this problem? So we look for Republican victory demonstrates that you cannot beat the trusts. The trust money bought the floating vote and caused the result. So the trusts were able to get what they wanted by paying for their votes. So far we've seen no newspaper supports the allegation in this form. The objection to the trust contributions persists. The possibility of corrupting the administration, there's one, is the gravest danger to people. So people donating money to what this essentially says in these first 2 paragraphs is the trust bought their vote, they bought their election, and now the administration, because they got money from these people when they were trying to be elected, now that they are elected, are going to now be forced to help the trusts out by making laws that would be good for them. So it gives the appearance, even if there's not, it gives the appearance of being corrupt, doing something illegal. They may not be doing anything illegal, but it gives that appearance that something wrong is going on. Question number 2. How do they suggest solving the problem? Where is there a solution? So we have a problem. The corruption of an administration, the appearance of a corruption of an administration that's in charge. Now, what do we do in order to change that? How do we fix it? How do they try to fix it? What do they suggest? Should, whenever possible, even to suspect the secret partnership existed between the campaign managers for a candidate for president and corporations liable to punishment. Okay, that's not a solution. The Chicago Tribune, however, there should be a law, a statute requiring campaign committees which have to do with the election of presidents to open up the balance sheets to examination. So presidents, so they have to be able to, people have to be able to see where the money is coming from, where the money is going to. They want it to be very transparent. So they want to require campaign committees to open up their campaign balance sheets to an examination. So they want to make sure that there's no appearance of anything going on that shouldn't be. Okay, number 5. Our questions are, what do the photo and the caption show about working conditions in this factory? And 5B, how do you think people reacted to this photo and caption in 1911? So the caption, of course, is a group of oyster shuckers working at a canning factory. All but the smallest babies work. Began work at 3:30 a.m. and worked until 5 p.m. The little girl in the center working. Her mother said she's a real help to me. About 300 workers in Dunbar, Louisiana. Picture by Mr. Lewis Hine, who was a leading photographer of child labor. Very important photographer. So what do the photo and caption tell us about the story, about the picture here? It shows us that there are very poor work conditions and very long working hours. See, we can see the shells here. Nobody cleans this up. And the fact that it says we're working from 3:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. tells us we're working over 12 hours. We're working about 13 and a half, 14 hours a day. How do you think people reacted? You could have said that they were shocked to see children working in such long hours, poor conditions. Although there may have been the group of people that were actually used to it. So they might not have batted an eye and said, whatever. It goes on every day anyhow. Okay, document number 6. When was the Child Labor Committee organized? So we're looking for a year. What was the result of the increased concern by women and children in the early labor by women and children in the early 1900s? So let's see, we're looking for the National Child Labor Committee. When was it? By 1903, interest appeared. So it's not in 1903, it was actually organized in 1904. As you read through, you'll see by 1903, fresh interest appeared. The National Labor Committee was started in 1904. Okay, what was the result of this concern that people showed? If we look here, this just tells us inadequate pay, blah, blah, blah. In 8 years, 11 states were added to the people who barred factory employment for children. So, barring factory employment for children under 14. 18 more states barred night work for children under 16. 3 imposed an 8-hour workday for children. 21 states limited their labor. So the result of the increased concern about labor by children and women in the early 1900s were that some states lowered the amount of hours that people worked and lowered the amount of days that they could work. Pretty much done right there. Number 7. What problems about the meatpacking plant does Sinclair report in the jungle? And what problems might these practices present and how could they be avoided? Okay, so we look here. What problems about the meatpacking plant? We look at there were ends of smoked meat and the scraps of corned beef and all odds and ends of waste of the plants that would be dumped into old barrels in the cellar and left there. Some jobs only paid once in a long time. And these were the cleaning out of these waste barrels. Every spring they did it, and the barrels would be dirt, rust, old nails, and stale water. And cartload after cartload would be taken up and dumped into the hoppers with fresh meat, sent out for the public's breakfast. Some of it would be made into smoked sausage, in quotes. But the smoking took time, therefore it was expensive. They would call upon their chemistry department to preserve it and color it, and all the sausage came out in the same bowl. But when they came down to wrap it, they'd stamp some of it special, and for this they'd charge you 2 cents more a pound. So what are the problems here? Old scraps of meat and whatever else was laying around was thrown into hoppers with new meat. So it was not a very sanitary place. and things were not. See, if we look here, and I'll just give it to you right here, in the barrels would be dirt and rust and old nails and stale water. So we know that's unsanitary. We look down a little further, it would stamp it special and charge you more a pound for it. So it's not properly labeled. So it's dirty and not properly labeled. What problems might these problems cause? Health problems, obviously. If you're giving them old meat that's probably more than a year old, because it says up here in the document that it was a year, almost a year later, spring later, I believe it is. Cleaning out the waste barrels every spring, so who knows from fall to winter to spring, those are 3 seasons right there, how long those are going to be there. So it's going to cause health problems. People are going to get poisoned. People are going to die. Food safety regulations would be the way to go. So what problems might these cause? These problems that might be caused by this would be health problems with poisonous food and death. The way they could be avoided is by making some sort of food safety regulation that says you have to label things how they are, and you have to use things that are not old and dirty and rusty. Okay, very popular cartoon here with Teddy the Muckraker Roosevelt. Nauseating job, but it must be done. President Roosevelt takes a hold of investigating the muckrake himself in the packing house scandal. What is he doing? He's muckraking. He's investigating the meat scandal himself. Obviously, it tells you here, investigation, meat scandal, and there's Teddy. So we look at Teddy and we look at the rake that he's raking the muck with, and we see that it's in the meat scandal. So we know he's investigating. If you read it, it says investigation. So he's taking the investigation himself because he's not satisfied with how it's going. Why do you think meat packers were allowed to operate in such an unsanitary way in the first place? There were no laws. There were no regulations in this line of work. There was nobody there to tell you, don't do that. Don't put that in there. Nails don't go in meat. Fingers don't go in meat. Dead rats don't go in meat. There was nobody there to tell you that. So, hey, if we're going to do it, we might as well do it the way we want. Okay, I hope that helped. And until next time, thank you. Good night and good luck.